What would you do if you ruled the underworld, but couldn't save your own family? In the fortified hills above the city of Blackridge, Dragon Lord Victor Harley ruled both the criminal underworld and the ancient flame in his blood. To the world, he was a ruthless syndicate kingpin, untouchable, calculating, merciless. His name alone silenced rivals. Entire factions collapsed at the whisper of his retaliation. But power is a fragile illusion when grief strikes without warning. In secret, Victor was the last heir of a hidden dragon lineage and alpha, capable of shifting into a creature of fire and shadow. Ancient blood pulsed through his veins, granting him strength beyond mortal limits. His enemies feared his influence. They feared his wealth. They feared the monster he could become. Yet none of that power could shield the one person who mattered most. Everything shattered the night his wife, Clara Harley, was ambushed and murdered by a rival faction known only as the Serpents. The attack was not chaotic. It was precise, calculated, brutal. They did not just kill her, they sent her. Message carved in blood and flame. A warning to the Dragon Lord that even he could bleed. Clara left behind 4-year-old identical triplets. Lily, Emma, and Grace. Innocent, fragile, watching from the shadows as violence tore their world apart. They witnessed enough to fracture something delicate inside their young hearts. After that night, they did not speak. Not a word. Not a cry. Not even a whisper in their sleep. Only silence. The silence became heavier than any threat Victor had ever faced. Desperate to fix what could not be controlled, Victor turned to the only weapons he trusted: power and money. Specialists arrived in waves. Renowned child psychologists, trauma experts, elite private doctors flown in under secrecy. Even discreet supernatural consultants who understood the ancient bloodline Victor carried. Each promised hope. Each failed. None could reach the girls. The Harley estate, once alive with Clara's laughter and warmth, transformed into something unrecognizable. The grand halls echoed with emptiness. Chandeliers glittered above rooms devoid of life. The mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt like a fortress guarding grief. Victor responded the only way he knew how: by becoming harder, colder, more feared. He buried himself in vengeance and the relentless expansion of his empire. The Serpents paid in fire and ash. Rival syndicates disappeared. His dominance tightened across Blackridge like an iron grip. To the outside world, the Dragon Lord had never been stronger. Yet inside his own home, he was powerless before 3 small girls who would not look him in the eye. They avoided his touch, avoided his voice, avoided the father who would burn cities to protect them. Margaret, the longtime housekeeper who had served the family for years, carried her own quiet grief. She watched the children drift further away each day, exhausted by the overwhelming responsibility of caring for 3 silent girls and maintaining the massive estate. She finally confronted Victor. The house was too large, the burden too heavy. They needed additional help. Victor barely listened at first. His mind was consumed by strategy, retaliation, control. But eventually, with detached indifference, he approved the idea. Hire someone. Vet them thoroughly. Background checks. Loyalty verification. No weaknesses. No risks. In his world, trust was a liability. He gave the order without understanding its weight. Because beyond those guarded gates, someone was walking toward his estate. Someone who would not fear the dragon, nor bow to the kingpin. Someone whose presence would challenge the walls he had built around his heart. Victor Harley believed his greatest battles were fought in the shadows of the underworld. He was wrong. His greatest battle was about to begin at home. If you're drawn to powerful alpha heroes, heartbreaking family drama, dragon bloodlines, and emotional redemption that will leave you breathless, this is the story you cannot afford to miss. What if the most dangerous place in the city wasn't a battlefield but a home hollowed by grief? When Sarah Bennett arrived at the Harley estate, the iron gates of Blackridge's most feared compound closed behind her like the jaws of a beast. The metallic echo rang through her chest as if warning her she could still turn back. Armed guards tracked her every movement with cold precision. Their expressions were unreadable, their fingers never far from their weapons. Armored vehicles lined the courtyard like silent predators at rest. Even the wind felt sharp here. The air itself seemed dangerous, charged with tension, power, and something darker that lingered beneath the surface. Sarah nearly turned back. Every instinct told her this was not just another housekeeping job. This was the home of Victor Harley, the man whispered about in courtrooms, feared in alleyways, and respected in silence. A man who ruled Blackridge's underworld with ruthless efficiency. A man who had buried his wife and turned colder afterward. But Sarah needed the job. Her younger brother, Daniel, had been falsely imprisoned after crossing paths with the Serpents, the same faction responsible for Clara Hale's murder. The system had failed him. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence vanished. Sarah had spent every dollar she had fighting the case. She had sold her car. She had emptied her savings. She had begged for help. This was her last chance to earn enough to keep Daniel's appeal alive. Margaret, the longtime housekeeper, studied her carefully the moment they met. Her gaze was sharp, but not unkind. She had seen many applicants come and go, most intimidated before even stepping through the door. Sarah did not pretend to be fearless. When asked if she understood the risks of working in such a household, she answered honestly, "Yes, I'm afraid." The guards shifted slightly at her admission. "But I'm more afraid of losing my brother." Something in that truth settled between them. Margaret recognized it immediately, the look of someone who had already lost too much. That honesty earned Sarah a trial position. Her first encounter with Victor Harley left her shaken in a way she could not explain. He entered the room without sound, yet the atmosphere changed instantly. He was tall, controlled, every movement deliberate. His dark suit fit him like armor. His eyes were unnaturally sharp like embers beneath ice, watching, measuring, calculating. There was something ancient about him, predatory, powerful, as though he carried centuries of fire behind his calm expression. He asked her only a few questions. Each one felt like a test. Each silence felt heavier than the last. Then she saw the girls. Lily, Emma, and Grace stood by the window, small silhouettes against pale light. They were identical in face, identical in fragile stillness. Their eyes stared at nothing, empty in a way that felt wrong for children so young. Not angry, not crying, just distant. The sight struck Sarah harder than the guards, harder than Victor's gaze. Something in her chest tightened. She knelt gently in front of them and said hello, her voice soft but steady. No response, no blink of recognition, only silence thick enough to suffocate. That night, as she worked, alone polishing the long corridors and restoring small corners of the estate, Sarah softly hummed an old lullaby her mother once sang during difficult times. The melody was simple, imperfect, but warm. It drifted through the halls like smoke, subtle, searching, alive. The mansion listened. Unseen by her, 3 small shadows paused outside her door. Tiny hands pressed lightly against the frame. 3 sets of grey-blue eyes watched from the darkness, drawn by something they had not felt in over a year. And in his private study, Victor Harley froze. For the first time in over a year, something shifted inside his cold fortress. It wasn't power. It wasn't rage. It was the faint, terrifying sound of hope returning. Weeks passed. Sarah worked tirelessly, restoring warmth to forgotten corners of the mansion. She cleaned, cooked, and quietly sang as she moved. The song became a thread stitching through the oppressive silence. It drifted through corridors that had long forgotten laughter, slipping beneath closed doors and curling around the cold marble staircases. The melody was soft, never intrusive, yet persistent like a candle refusing to go out in a storm. Victor observed from a distance. He told himself it was caution. In truth, he was watching hope unfold and fearing it. From the balcony outside his office, from the shadowed end of hallways, from security monitors glowing faintly in the dark, he watched the subtle shifts. He noticed how the girls no longer flinched when Sarah entered a room. He saw how they lingered nearby when she hummed. He told himself he was simply ensuring his daughter's safety, that the tightness in his chest betrayed him. Hope was dangerous. Hope could be taken away. During the third week, Lily left a crayon drawing on Sarah's bedside table. It was a dragon not frightening, but wounded, surrounded by fire that did not burn it. The strokes were uneven, colors pressed hard into the paper, as if emotion had guided her small hand. The dragon's eyes were large and sad. Its wings were folded, not in menace, but in pain. Sarah did not mention it directly. She framed it and placed it in the hallway where everyone could see. No praise, no spotlight, just quiet acknowledgement. A silent message. I see you. That evening, Grace hummed. Just one soft note, echoing Sarah's melody. The sound was fragile, almost uncertain, as if testing whether it was allowed to exist. It floated through the air and settled over the house like a blessing. The sound froze the entire household. A glass slipped from a servant's hand in the kitchen. Footsteps halted mid-stride. Even the guards near the entrance exchanged startled glances. Margaret, standing near the staircase, pressed her hand to her mouth as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She had prayed for this moment in whispers no one else heard. Victor heard it from his office. His dragon senses sharpened instantly. The faint vibration of sound carried differently. To him he felt it as much as he heard it, like a tremor beneath his skin. He rose so abruptly that his chair struck the wall behind him. His heart pounded, not with fury, but with disbelief. He rushed to the hall but stopped short of entering. He was afraid his presence would break the moment. Afraid that the shadow he carried might silence her again. So he stood hidden, gripping the edge of the doorway, listening as Grace's single hum faded into stillness. The next day, Emma whispered her first words in over a year. She looked up at Sarah with solemn eyes and asked why her song sounded lonely. The question hung in the air, delicate and sacred. Sarah knelt so they were eye level. She did not pretend cheerfulness. She did not disguise the truth. She answered honestly. She told them about losing her father, about fighting for Daniel, about nights when grief felt heavier than breath. She explained that sometimes songs carry sadness because sadness means you loved someone deeply. And love, even when it hurts, is something to protect, not bury. The girls listened. Something shifted. The walls inside them began to crumble, not with noise, but with quiet surrender. Words came slowly, at first hesitant, halting, but they came. Lily spoke of Clara's perfume, how it smelled like flowers after rain. Emma remembered the way their mother braided their hair before bed. Grace whispered about the nickname Clara used her 3 sparks. For the first time, Victor heard his daughters say their mother's name aloud. The sound struck him harder than any weapon ever had. Clara. He closed his eyes as the memory flooded back her laughter, her warmth, the way she had once rested her hand over his and told him even dragons deserved peace. And deep within him, the dragon stirred not with rage, not with vengeance, not with fire, but with something far more dangerous. Hope. By the 8th week, laughter returned to the Harley estate. It startled the guards. It unsettled Victor's advisors. The sound did not belong within those iron gates. It moved through the corridors like something alive, bouncing off marble floors and vaulted ceilings that had long forgotten joy. Even the staff walked more softly, as if afraid sudden noise might scare it away. Happiness was unfamiliar territory. Victor noticed the change immediately. The tension that once suffocated the mansion had loosened. His daughters no longer avoided the sunlight pouring through the tall windows. Their small footsteps echoed again in the halls. Their voices, fragile but real, floated through rooms that had known nothing but silence for over a year. And yet, instead of relief, a different emotion crept into Victor's chest. Suspicion. Victor began investigating Sarah. No one entered his world without scrutiny. He had built his empire on vigilance. Trust was a weakness his enemies exploited, and he had survived by never overlooking a detail. At first, he told himself it was routine, a precaution, a necessary step for the protection of his family. But as reports filtered in, routine caution hardened into something darker. What he discovered ignited his fury. Her family had been targeted by the Serpents years ago. The same faction responsible for Clara's murder. The same network Victor had hunted mercilessly across states and borders. Sarah's father had been caught in that violence. Her brother's case, Daniel's imprisonment, overlapped with operations Victor himself had crushed in his war for dominance. The connections were indirect, tangled in the chaos of criminal warfare, but they existed. And to a man like Victor Harley, that was enough. Had she known who he was all along? Had her gentle presence, her soft lullabies, her patience with his daughters been something else entirely? Was she sent to exploit his daughters? The questions spread like wildfire through his mind. Every memory twisted under the heat of doubt. The framed drawing in the hallway. The first hum from Grace. The tearful confessions about Clara. Were those moments genuine or calculated? The dragon inside him roared with suspicion. He felt it beneath his skin, a restless heat crawling along his spine. His instincts, honed by years of betrayal and bloodshed, screamed at him to eliminate the threat before it rooted itself deeper. Love, he had learned, could be weaponized. Weakness invited destruction. And Sarah Bennett had become a weakness. Without confronting her fully, Victor made a devastating decision. He summoned her to the main hall. Staff lingered at the edges, sensing the shift in the air. The girls were upstairs, unaware of the storm gathering below. Victor stood tall, his expression carved from stone. He fired Sarah, coldly, publicly. His voice did not waver as he accused her of hidden motives. He referenced the connections, the overlapping histories, the possibility that her presence had never been coincidence. He spoke not as a grieving father, but as a crime lord delivering judgment. The words cut clean and sharp. Sarah did not beg. She did not argue. She did not reveal anger. She only looked at him with wounded disbelief. Her eyes searched his face as if hoping to find the man who had once listened to her stories in the kitchen, who had watched silently as his daughters laughed again. But that man was buried beneath armor. After a long, steady breath, she nodded once. Quiet acceptance. Then she turned and walked out the gates. No dramatic exit. No final plea. Just absence. The silence returned instantly. It was not gradual. It fell like a curtain. Lily stopped drawing. The crayons remained untouched on the table. Emma retreated into blank stares, her eyes once again distant and unreachable. Grace refused to leave her room, the door closed as if sealing herself away from another loss. The laughter vanished as if it had never existed. The estate felt colder than before, because now everyone knew what it had felt like to be warm. Margaret confronted Victor with rare fury. She did not knock before entering his study. Her composure, maintained through grief and chaos, finally cracked. She accused him of destroying the only light his daughters had found. She reminded him that money, power, and fear had failed where simple kindness had succeeded. Victor did not respond. He could not, because deep down, something inside him already knew. That night, Victor shifted into his dragon form atop the cliffs of Blackridge. The transformation tore through him in a blaze of fire and bone. Massive wings unfurled against the moonlit sky. Scales like molten steel reflected the city lights below. The wind howled as he launched himself into the darkness. Flames tore through the sky as he roared into the night. The sound echoed for miles, raw, furious, and hollow. For the first time, he realized his greatest enemy was not the serpents. It was his own pride. Victor found Sarah working at a quiet diner on the edge of Blackridge. The place was small and nearly empty, washed in the dull glow of fluorescent lights and the low hum of a tired refrigerator behind the counter. Outside, the evening air hung heavy with approaching rain. Inside, the scent of coffee and fried bread lingered. No guards, no armor. Just him. He stood in the doorway longer than necessary, adjusting to the strange vulnerability of being unaccompanied. For years he had moved like a king behind walls of protection, bulletproof glass, armed convoys, loyal enforcers. Now there was nothing shielding him. No intimidation. No spectacle. Only a man stepping into unfamiliar territory. Sarah noticed him while refilling a cup. Her hand paused mid-motion, but she did not flinch. She finished pouring, set the pot down carefully, and walked toward him with steady composure. There was hurt in her eyes, but not fear. He did something no rival had ever witnessed. He apologized. The word felt foreign on his tongue, heavier than any threat he had ever delivered. He did not soften it with excuses. He did not justify his actions. He simply said he was wrong. He admitted fear had driven him. Fear of losing his daughters again. Fear of trusting anyone. Fear that hope itself was a weakness his enemies could exploit. He confessed that her presence had forced him to see the man he had become, a dragon ruling ashes instead of protecting his own home. He told her he had built an empire out of vengeance, convinced himself it was strength, and in the process nearly destroyed the one thing Clara had died protecting. Sarah listened but did not forgive easily. Her silence was measured, not cold. She reminded him that trust was not restored by words spoken in a quiet diner. It was built by choices made when no one was watching. She told him that love required courage greater than violence. She gave him 2 days to prove he could change, not with promises, but actions. Victor accepted without negotiation. The following morning, he began dismantling parts of his operation that had long fueled the war with the serpents. He withdrew from direct criminal decisions and reassigned leadership to distance himself from the blood-soaked strategies he once commanded personally. Meetings that once revolved around retaliation now focused on containment and quiet severance. He redirected resources toward dismantling the remaining serpent network, quietly, strategically, not with public spectacle or brutal displays, but with calculated precision that cut their supply lines and exposed their corruption. He eliminated leverage rather than lives. It was a different kind of power, one that demanded restraint instead of dominance. At the same time, he turned his attention to Daniel's case. Files were reopened. Evidence that had been buried surfaced through carefully placed channels. Witnesses reconsidered statements. Within months, Daniel's conviction was overturned after new evidence surfaced. Victor ensured reached the right hands. When Sarah received the call confirming her brother's release, she did not celebrate immediately. She waited. She watched. And when she saw that Victor's changes were not temporary gestures but deliberate shifts, she made her decision. When Sarah returned to the estate, the girls ran to her. They spoke. They cried. They clung to her as if she were air. Their small arms wrapped around her waist, their voices tumbling over one another in breathless relief. Laughter mixed with tears, filling the halls that had once echoed with silence. Victor watched from the doorway, something fierce and tender burning in his chest. It was not possession, not pride, not control. It was awe. For the first time in his life, he understood that strength was not measured by how tightly he held power, but by how willingly he released it. This time, he chose not control but trust. 6 months later, the Harley estate no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a home. The towering iron gate still stood guard at the entrance, and the stone walls still rose high against the cliffs of Blackridge. But something essential had shifted within them. The air no longer carried the suffocating weight of grief. The hallways no longer echoed with hollow silence. Instead, warmth lingered in the room's soft, lived-in warmth that could not be bought or commanded. Victor stepped back from much of his criminal empire, placing distance between himself and the blood-soaked path that once defined him. Meetings that once consumed his nights were delegated. Operations that required ruthless oversight were handed to trusted lieutenants. He no longer sought expansion, no longer chased dominance for its own sake. The fire that once drove him to conquer now burned with quieter purpose. His dragon still lived within him, but now it guarded rather than destroyed. There were moments when he felt it stir beneath his skin, ancient and powerful, a reminder of what he was capable of. But instead of craving battle, it seemed attuned to the rhythm of his daughter's laughter, to the steady calm that had begun to settle over his home. The beast that once answered rage had learned restraint. Daniel visited often. His presence, once a fragile hope, had become a steady part of their lives. He would sit with the girls on the grand staircase, listening to their endless stories, helping them piece together puzzles, letting them braid his hair with serious concentration. His freedom was no longer a whispered miracle but a living reality that filled the estate with gratitude. Laughter echoed through the halls. It bounced off marble floors and curled around banisters, reaching even the highest ceilings. It startled the staff, at first so unfamiliar after months of silence, that soon it became the soundtrack of the Harley estate. The sound did not feel fragile anymore. It felt rooted. One afternoon, they planted sunflowers along the cliffs overlooking Blackridge. The wind carried the scent of salt and distant pine as the ocean stretched endlessly below. The girls insisted their mother loved yellow. They spoke about it with certainty, recalling how she would wear golden dresses in summer and call them her little rays of sun. Victor listened as they pressed seeds into the soil with small, determined hands. He knelt beside them, rolling up the sleeves of his shirt, ignoring the dirt beneath his nails. The cliffside that once felt like a place of solitude and brooding had become a garden of calm and beginnings. As they worked, a single violet butterfly drifted through the air, delicate and unhurried. It moved in slow circles around them, catching the sunlight on its wings. The girls stilled, their eyes wide with wonder as it floated closer. The butterfly circled once more before landing briefly on Victor's hand. For a moment no one breathed. The creature's wings opened and closed gently, as if resting. Victor felt the faintest brush against his skin, weightless, almost unreal. The girls gasped, whispering that it was Clara saying hello. Victor did not dismiss it. He had seen too much of the supernatural to doubt small miracles. He had walked through fire and shadow, had felt ancient power pulse through his veins. Compared to those things, a butterfly carrying memory did not seem impossible. He allowed himself to believe not in magic alone, but in connection. In the idea that love did not vanish simply because a life ended. When the butterfly lifted into the sky and disappeared beyond the cliff's edge, the girls smiled instead of crying. They did not cling to grief. They held the moment like a gift. As the sun set, firelight glowed softly in his eyes, not with rage, but warmth. The golden horizon painted everything in amber hues, reflecting in the windows of the estate behind them. For the first time in a long while, Victor did not feel like a ruler surveying territory. He felt like a father watching his children grow. The dragon within him was still powerful, still ancient, but it was no longer chained to vengeance. It was anchored to something stronger. He finally understood something power had never taught him. Wealth was meaningless without love. Strength meant nothing without mercy. And even a dragon lord could choose redemption. He had once believed fear was the surest way to protect what mattered. Fear kept enemies at bay. Fear built empires. Fear demanded obedience. But fear had not saved his daughters. Fear had not healed their silence. In the end, it was not fear that saved his family. It was a song carried through silence.